Welcome to this lesson. I'm going to start by asking a question that might seem quite obvious. But as I hold my hand up and you look at the screen, answering the question, how many? Now you may have said one hand, or one thumb. You may have said five fingers and a thumb, or even four fingers. Now what if I say that is not the answer? The answer is 4. And can you see the 4? So the 4 are the 4 spaces between the fingers and thumb. And if you're an artist, you might be familiar with looking at negative space, but that might also be something you would never think to look at. And so this is what we're doing as we go through this course, is we're starting to explore the world of assumptions, the world of how we fall into automatic ways of interpreting the world and our experience of the world. As we grow up, it's as if we have a lens that we see the world through. And when we're young, the lens is quite clear and clean, and we can see all manner of possibilities and see without obstruction. But as we grow up, the influence from parents, from schooling, from our society, it has an impact on that lens. And so by the time we're an adult, the lens may be cracked in places, it may be obscured with some dirt. And we can only see through in a very partial or limited way. And this is what happens as we learn to live in this autopilot mode of being. This is the theme of this first lesson, living life on autopilot. So autopilot can be useful. Autopilot is how we learn to navigate the world. On a very deep level, our brain learns to see the world through templates. So as we look out at the world, a tree, a chair, a human form, we have a template for that in our brain. And so we can very quickly recognize what it is that's around us without having to look in detail at every single item. But where autopilot starts to fall down is when I fall into habitual ways of thinking about myself. So it's useful if I have an autopilot for knowing how to tie my shoelaces before I go out. It's useful if I have an autopilot for knowing how to drive my car or ride a bike, and I don't have to relearn that each time. It's not so useful when I have an automatic way of thinking about myself or relating to the world. If I fall into an autopilot of self-blame or doubt or worry, if I fall into an autopilot of feeling anger at others or resentment, these are all ways that limit how I might be, how I might respond to the present moment if I had an open, more creative attitude. I remember a life coach teaching me a lesson some years ago which really illustrates what can happen to us through this conditioning process of education, family, social shaping. He was talking about circus fleas, which isn't a common thing now, but there used to be a show where you would have different fleas jumping at different levels. Now a flea can jump from the floor to the ceiling, but the way these fleas were trained was that they would have a glass jar put on top of them, and this would then stop them from being able to jump, and they would jump and hit the top of the jar. And after a while of doing this, they would then just sort of think, well, you know, this isn't working. I guess I better just jump a little bit below, so I'm not bashing myself. And then the jar's removed, and for the rest of their lives, they only ever jump within that limited range. So some of these limiting beliefs we take on about ourselves, they mean we only live within this limiting range of potential. We're going to have a look at some text now which illustrates just how powerful autopilot is on an unconscious level. So if you look at your screen and then see how it is to read what appears initially perhaps to be like nonsense letters, and see if you can start to decipher the meaning within this paragraph. And so you may well now have come to the end of the paragraph. I'll read it through so that it's clear if there's any need for clarity. I couldn't believe that I could actually understand what I was reading. Using the incredible power of the human mind, according to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without a problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. Amazing, huh? Yeah, and I always thought spelling was important. See if your friends can read this too. So there we have an example of just how powerful autopilot can be. Now, as well as maybe being able to understand the words because of the first and last letter, there's also a sense that there's a certain context, a certain understanding of the grammar and the flow of a sentence, and so we create a structure based on that understanding. And in the same way, perhaps we sometimes just see our life being caught in a certain flow, a certain way, and then we don't realize that there are other possibilities within that. So this course is very much about exploring the autopilot modes that we may be living in. And as you go through this week by week, really noticing what might be your own autopilot modes of behaviour. Noticing if there are familiar patterns of thinking, familiar ways of behaving. So an image I like to work with is of a drop of water rolling down the side of a cave. And at first that water could go in any direction, but it takes a certain route. And then over time of continuing that same route, it starts to carve a groove in the rock, until eventually that groove determines where the water goes, and the water has no option but to be anywhere other than just running down this groove. So exploring your own life as we go through these modules and reflecting on where have I fallen into habitual ways of behaving, ways which maybe limit the full expression of who I am. In the same way that that water has fallen into just a familiar groove in the rock. I'm going to lead a short practice now around experiencing things afresh. So if you haven't done so already, pausing the video here and going and getting an item of food, something small that you can easily eat. So it might be a biscuit, it could be a raisin, some dried fruit, anything you have to hand, and preferably something that you enjoy and maybe eat quite frequently. So now that we have this, I invite you to imagine that you are a Martian visiting this blue planet for the first time. And you're bringing a curious attitude to this piece of food that you're being given. So taking this piece of food in your hand and initially letting it rest in your palm and simply feeling the weight of it here, resting in your palm. And then taking it between your fingers and thumb and rolling it so that it catches the light, and just noticing how it has highlights where it catches the lights, shadows. Noticing its colour and the different tones within those colours. Noticing if it's translucent, if the light shines through it in any places, or if it's solid and dense. And then giving it a gentle squeeze, noticing is it hard, brittle, crumbly, or soft? How does it feel to the touch? And bringing it to your ear, giving it a squeeze, rolling it between your finger and thumb. Noticing, is there a sound or is it silent? And then bring it to your nose, and taking a few deep breaths. Really noticing the scent of this object. Noticing if this is how you would expect it to smell, or whether you notice something different. Do you really pay attention to any scent? And then letting this object rest in your hand again, and for a moment just noticing your own thoughts or responses to this. Maybe you're already thinking about how much you're going to enjoy eating it, or that this is one of your favourite things. Maybe you're thinking it seems strange to take so long before actually eating it, and you're noticing a feeling of eagerness to start tasting it. Just noticing your response to this object as you observe it here in your hand. And in a moment I'll invite you to put this in your mouth and to start eating. But we're going to eat in a particular way. When I was in the monastery, the training was to eat for 30 chews every mouthful. And you're not going to have to count as you do this. But I do invite you to chew more than you probably normally would. So as you place it in your mouth, just letting it be there, holding it on your tongue for a moment, and then feeling as you move it into place to take your first bite. And then chewing until it has all dissolved away. And then once you feel it has dissolved into a liquid, swallowing and noticing any aftertaste there might be. So I won't be guiding us through this. I'll leave you to have your own experience there. Simply noticing the texture of this as you place it in your mouth, consciously taking the first bite, and then chewing until you find it has dissolved and you're ready to swallow, and noticing any aftertaste. So when you're ready, placing it in your mouth. So now you might be noticing the aftertaste. If you're still chewing, just pausing the video for a moment and restarting when you're ready. So what did you notice there? What was it like to bring this curious attention to the taste, the flavour? You might like to pause the video for a moment and jot some notes down about what this exercise brought up for you, whether you noticed an increased enjoyment of the foods that you were eating, whether you noticed a deeper sense of taste, or whether it brought up a sense of frustration because you were just eager to eat this and you were taking so much longer than you normally would. Taking a few moments to reflect on what you noticed. And during the week ahead, I invite you to really bring this attitude towards the foods that you're eating. You won't perhaps go as slow as this with everything that you're eating, but noticing what is your autopilot around food. Is it easy for you to take a mouthful and swallow without really noticing what's there? And what happens if you slow that down a little bit? Really chew and notice the flavours and take some time to enjoy. Now this can be very powerful. We may have developed autopilots of not really being connected to our experience of eating. And there was someone on one of my courses who, when he started the course, he was scheduled for going on to some medication. He was severely overweight, and there were some complications that needed to be treated with medication. We did this exercise, and after 8 weeks, we were checking in, and he said that he'd gone for his follow-up test, and it was supposed to be the preparation for him actually starting the medication. But they said, oh, you know, this is amazing, you've lost so much weight, and these complicating factors are no longer there because with you losing weight, these things have resolved. And he said that what he realized was that he worked in an office where there was always cake, there were so many people, there'd always be a birthday. And he had an autopilot that if he walked past a cake or a box of donuts, he would eat one. And then he'd take another slice of cake and another. And so then he started to challenge himself around that behaviour. So it got to the point after a few weeks where people were saying, you know, what's going on? It's like normally everything's gone by the end of the day, but we've still got all these donuts left, or we've got half a cake left. And he suddenly realised, that was me. That was me. I was eating half that cake. I was eating that box of donuts. And I wasn't even really conscious of doing it. So it may not be that it will be that specific scenario for you, but seeing what happens over this week as you bring more conscious attention to eating and to the experience of eating, whether perhaps there's a little more enjoyment, whether you maybe slow down a little bit, or maybe you just discover something unique for yourself. And I'll be fascinated to hear whatever that is. We're going to finish now with a poem. This poem is looking at how we may look back at our life with a slight sense of regret if we tend to stay within certain limited ways of experiencing the world. Now, people sometimes hear this poem and feel that it's a little melancholy. Really, it's a reminder to us that we have a chance now to make choices about how we are living this life, rather than waiting until we're looking back and when we're older and wishing that we had made different choices earlier. So this poem it's a response of an 85-year-old woman when she was asked, if you were given the chance, how would you live your life differently? If I had my life to live over again, I'd dare to make more mistakes next time. I'd relax. I'd limber up. I'd be sillier than I've been this trip. I would take fewer things seriously. I would take more chances. I would eat more ice cream and less beans. I would, perhaps, have more actual troubles but fewer imaginary ones. You see, I'm one of those people who was sensible and sane hour after hour, day after day. Oh, I've had my moments. If I had to do it over again, I'd have more of them. In fact, I'd try to have nothing else, just moments, one after another. Instead of living so many years ahead of each day, I've been one of those persons who never goes anywhere without a thermometer, a hot water bottle, a raincoat, a parachute. If I could do it again, I would travel lighter than I have. If I had to live my life over, I would start barefoot earlier in the spring and stay that way later in the fall. I would go to more dances. I would ride more merry-go-rounds. I would pick more daisies. So that brings this lesson to a close. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson, where we'll continue to explore these themes in lesson 1.